Dokchara.
The helmet I'd had custom made for my unique face shape slowly became less comfortable as time went on. The lower back of the helmet reached down to perfectly meet one of the seams in my neck, causing it to dig between and push the plates of chitin apart whenever I rested my head on my seat. It was annoying, but it was something I needed to put up with until I could get back to the Meldrin system, since this helmet was by far the most important piece of gear I had on me. Not only did it offer some impressive protection for the only irreplaceable part of my body, it also had a built-in heads-up display that fed me information pertaining to the area around me. It was a close equivalent to the mandatory network interface implants that every human soldier had installed, though it lacked the advanced scanning abilities and nuanced targeting guidance systems afforded by its inline counterparts. Most of the gear I was wearing carried a similar trend, close enough to the real thing to prevent me from being a liability, but stopping just short in effectiveness. This might have led me to fall out of formation had I been put together with the main force, but I was instead assigned to a special group along with Dominique, who was more aware of my pace. For the time being, I was still in the main passenger cabin along with every other soldier. I had expected to see a crew of metal men similar to Dominique, but to my surprise, every person here barring Dominique himself had relatively standardized and reserved augmentations. I saw limbs lined with metal reinforcements, joints that had been replaced with machine counterparts, spines and ribs swapped out for far less vulnerable interlocking plates and alloy cages. But nobody had gone as far as to replace their skin and abandon their given image like he had. Their implants were complementary to their natural forms, whereas Dominique bore no components of his natural kit, only a synthetic mimicry of what he once was. I decided that I'd ask him about that after this mission ended. The passenger cabin, which housed about 80-odd soldiers, was drenched in a tense and suspenseful atmosphere. Everyone shared the same shifty eyes that darted across their fields of view. Some people fiddled with their fingers or various personal items they brought along with them. One soldier next to me was twisting this odd cube that had each face divided into 9 segments, all with different colors. He seemed momentarily elated when one face was all the same color, but it was quickly followed by a deflation of the ego and more twisting. If the goal was to get all sides to be their own solid color, he was doing an embarrassingly poor job. Alert! 10 minutes remaining until jump. The robotic woman's voice that echoed from the speakers in the ceiling, paired with a pop-up timer appearing on my helmet's display, was met with a wave of shifting and murmurs from the rows of soldiers in the cabin. Humanity's colonization expeditions had included fair sums of soldiers with field experience or promising simulation scores, but these people were originally under the assumption that they wouldn't be getting any action at their destination, instead being relegated to office positions or peacekeeping roles. Now they were in full combat gear and minutes away from cutting the red tape and getting this war started. We were currently in the void of space aboard the Challenger Deep, humanity's first dedicated combat vessel in this cluster of the galaxy. The Mayflower was nearby as well, but it would be remaining on standby in case its extra firepower was needed at either our area of operation or the Meldrin system, should it come under attack. I found that measure to be quite outlandish, considering the Challenger Deep, although not very impressive in terms of size, packed enough firepower and jamming ability to lock down a small system on its own. Calling for assistance might be necessary should an entire Greatonian fleet warp in on us, but this ship would at least take down half of them before succumbing to enemy fire. The human philosophy for space combat was unique amongst the known races of the galaxy. They had gotten so proficient at packing as much lethality into smaller ships that their space warfare was dominated by speed and stealthiness, instead of the conventional mass of colossal galleons or overbearing swarms. They had reached a point where there was no realistic defensive answer to every offensive possibility, and the only remaining options one could take were striking first without ever being seen, or being a massive, vulnerable target. One of these had a far greater rate of success than the other. I had read a documentary on human history and development that likened the current state of space combat to a field of smoke, mirrors, and rocket launchers, a humorous yet macabre simplification. They were quite good at those. The timer on my display had now passed the halfway mark, and I could faintly hear the rumbling of the FTL drive doing a slow spool up. It wasn't much longer until we would warp in above a Gratonian planet, where most of the soldiers here would be filing into boarding vessels and storming their primary space station, while the ship provided support and broadcasted humanity's rules of war. Once the station was secured, they would attain global network traffic control and search for info on this mysterious secret weapon the Grats had been using to thwart our scouting operations. The separate squad I had been placed in would be on reserve for planet-side operations once we were cleared for the drop. I had found it confusing that we would be doing that, considering this wasn't one of the planets that I had detailed in the intel I had provided, but apparently this target was requested by the Nematorians, so I decided not to question it. I snapped out of my train of thought when I realized that the low murmurs which had been steadily rising in energy quickly died out. My attention was brought to the front of the cabin by Officer Isaiah Crow's metallic footsteps as he made his way center stage. He shuffled through a few white rectangular cards in his hands before stuffing them into his pocket and clearing his throat, scoring a few chuckles throughout his audience. Take pride in knowing that, despite being further out from Earth than any man in history has ever been, you have all found yourselves to be exactly where you should be. Starting now, you're not just fighting for the home team over petty territorial disputes. You're fighting for billions of people that are looking to you as a beacon of hope. Billions of people that, just a week ago, you would have never had known even existed, even in your wildest dreams. People that have spent their lives in fear and suffering because you're about to go fight some fucked up individuals. So, remember to look good for the cameras, and above all else, let's all make it home tonight. Hoorah!
Pioneer Dominique Reynolds. Upon our actualization over the target Gratonian world, the crew at the helm of this vessel spared no time in raucously announcing our presence. A cannonade of self-propelled tungsten-cord stakes spilled forth from the belly of the Challenger deep and sailed across polar trajectories, seeking to ruin their targets with precise perforations. It was akin to a pair of godly hands dancing their fingers across the surface of the planet, smothering avenues of resistance one by one. Orbital defense cannons, deep space communication dishes, and spaceports alike. Anything with the ability to influence our operation was dealt swift and unavoidable destruction. Collateral was unfortunately unavoidable, but the numbers were far less devastating than the toll that would have been accrued by use of more traditional methods. Following this release of ordnance, another attack was made on our more immediate target, the Gratonian space station. The angle of our FTL jump had placed us near the station and in a matching orbit, allowing us to immediately take action against them before they could even begin to comprehend what was happening. A light show of pinpoint lasers washed over the station, shearing away external armaments and various antennae, while leaving the main construct relatively unmarred. This station was not solely used by the Gratonian military, it was also responsible for a massive portion of civilian and commercial internet traffic, as well as acting as the main space trading hub for this planet. There was a large percentage of civilian personnel aboard the station that we wouldn't want to risk turning into meat satellites, so we needed to act with a degree of delicate precision. With the immediate threats to the ship being subdued, all of the primary force soldiers in the cabin were given the signal to get up and make their way to the edges of the ship, where their assigned boarding vessels awaited. Everyone strapped in and ran their routine security checks. Then squad leaders were given the cue to voice their witty one-liners before the vessels were launched towards the station in a spread. The aptly named cookie-cutter shark boarding vessels impacted various flat surfaces on the station and welded themselves to it before sawing into the plating and carving away a large disc, resulting in an airtight seal for the soldiers to pass through, while avoiding the conventional and easily defensible entrances. Only a handful of people remained in the cabin, making it feel much larger than it had just a few moments ago. There were still a few minutes remaining before the ship reached the planet-side squad's designated drop-off point, and while we were technically supposed to be making our way to the landing can, nobody would be reprimanded for using a leisurely pace. I noticed Dokchara was sitting by himself at the far end of the room, idly fidgeting with his hands as he stared into space. Back when we arrived at the Meldrin system, and after he got his evaluation completed, he spent just about every waking hour making sure he would be on the first ship out to Gratonian territory. If it weren't for the Meldrin military outsourcing program having been approved around the same time as his application for our ranks, I'm not sure he would have ever made it past our previously stringent onboarding process. Yet, despite all of the resolve and effort he displayed to make it on this ship, I wouldn't be surprised if he was still suffering in silence from some hidden anxiety that was flaring up right before he dropped into the fray again. I can't really speak on how he might feel deep inside, because what I saw back there wasn't directly related to me. While I didn't leave that facility unscathed, the people we saw in there weren't my people, nor did I have any possible familial connections with them. That wasn't the case for Dokchara. I stood up and weaved past the seats to make my way over to him. He snapped out of his thoughts and regained awareness of his surroundings as soon as I entered his field of view, so that at least told me that he wasn't completely lost in his own mind.
Hey, Doc, you doing okay? We need to get moving soon.
I'm fine. My helmet's a bit tight, though.
Oh, why didn't you run it down to the printing bay to get it refitted? I'm sure they would have been more than happy to help.
I didn't know we had a printing bay on board.
Wait, why do we even have one? I'm pretty sure this isn't a luxury cruise.
Damn, this cluster is bleak. No need to worry, the humans are here to save the day. Dokchara gave me his best attempt at a judgmental, scowl-raised eyebrow combo as he stood up from his chair, which honestly needed some extra work, considering his lack of prominent eyebrows. I wonder who he learned that expression from. Well, it's probably too late now. There's also a small printer in the landing can, so we can just use that to adjust the fittings anyway. With that, I took the lead as we made our way over to meet up with the rest of the squad. I randomly picked one of the many paths over to that side of the ship, leading to us passing through one of the raised halls that had windows looking out onto the intelligence room. There were rows of computer terminals with operators talking into their headsets. Each person was assigned to a squad, managing their actions to ensure that the takeover went smoothly. There was also a massive screen at the front of the room displaying live feeds from every soldier's body cam so that the operators could glance up and account for any unexpected developments in other squads. Dokchara had stopped momentarily when his attention was captured by one of the camera feeds on the screen. It was a standard breach and clear maneuver, though the breaching section was swiftly replaced with kicking the door open since detonations inside a pressurized system was a risky play, up until the squad realized that the heat signature behind the door was a Gratonian civilian. While this wasn't normally a complicated situation, there were two caveats regarding this civilian. One, they looked young. According to the basic information package everyone received on the Gratonians, they didn't start growing their horns until about halfway into their teenage years. And this one had a distinct lack of keratin and bone protruding from their head. Two, they had armed themselves with a taser gun and were now shakily pointing it up at the soldier who had breached the room. They tried taking a step backwards, only to be met with the wall behind them. In a panicked scream, they discharged the taser at the soldier. The darts flew out to meet the soldier's raised metal hand, and a surge of electricity traveled from the gun along the wires, and straight into the surge protectors built into the soldier's military-grade prosthetic hand. As the soldier stepped forward towards the young Gratonian, I noticed Dokchara quickly wince at the screen with a grimace on his face as he sucked air through his teeth, though he didn't take his eyes off of the scene. The soldier grabbed the taser gun out of the Gratonian's hands and snapped it in two before tossing it to the side. The young Great was shaking his head side to side with wide eyes before tripping on his feet and falling to the ground. The soldier's camera panned down far enough as he stepped back for me to realize that the civilian had a swollen ankle, possibly from tripping in panic due to the alarms blaring throughout the station. The soldier turned around and called over the squad's designated trauma care specialist after ensuring that the room was clear of threats. By this point, Dokchara was dumbfoundedly staring at the feed with his mouth agape. "Geez, okay? Do you think that we're monsters or something?" He shook his head and cleared his throat before looking back at me. "That's not normally how those situations would go.